in a good spot like this, wanting to sing, how incredible that sounds. And I just enjoyed that tonight. Well, I've tried to think a little bit about what to present tonight that would be helpful to you. And as South Africa and some of those places, and I think I've made 17 trips over there, and God willing, looking at a trip coming up in June. I'd be going again, working in most of the time in Zimbabwe, but a few days in Zambia again. And so I want to kind of pull that in to be a part of what the study is about tonight. But thinking just in terms of evangelism and what that is and how does that relate and how does that come into that. And I've heard 2 or 3 make comments about, evangelism is something that we need to be well aware of and something that we need to be active in. And I love the idea of that. You don't have to go to Africa to be involved in evangelism. There are needs here. There are people here, people that you know who are not Christians and who need to know the Lord. And we need to be effective at being able to capture the attention of people and to have opportunity to talk with them. Now, with some people, we're not going to get very far with that. Some people are not interested. You can't make them interested. But we can try to offer through, I hope, through good character and being a light to the world, we can offer them something to consider, something to see, perhaps where they become curious about who are we and why do we live a life that's a little different than everyone else. I hope we can do that. But then if that opportunity comes, what are we going to do? And how are we going to respond? Well, that part we're not going to talk about as much tonight. But I want us to start with a couple of passages here that are familiar to you, but some words of Jesus. We're going to Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9. This is a passage that means something to me every time I read it, because it is so descriptive. I get a picture in my mind of this scene as it unfolds, and I hope you can too. Because it shows us something about the character of Jesus. It tells us something about what he is most concerned about. We see in this chapter here, chapter 9, verse 35, that Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is truly plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of harvest that he will send out laborers into his harvest." I realize everyone is not a preacher, but still we are laborers in the kingdom. That is, we all have a place. There's a work that all of us can be involved in. And I just want us to consider and think about the heart of Jesus with regard to what was most important, what was on his mind. And what was on his mind right now is that there were those who were lost, like sheep without a shepherd. Pray the Lord of harvest, send forth laborers. That's us. That's us. And all of us have a place and a part to play in that. When Jesus was about to ascend to heaven in Matthew chapter 28, at least the apostles were there, perhaps some others as well, when he declared to them in verse 18, a reminder to them, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth." Verse 19, he commands them, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatever I have commanded you, and lo, I'm with you always, even until the end of the age." If that was a command given specifically to the apostles, we cannot think, well, that doesn't really apply to me. That doesn't mean anything to me because it was to the apostles. No, the apostles, they went out and they did as Jesus said to do. The Acts of the Apostles tell us that. The epistles tell us about that. But part of what he said is to make disciples and then continue to teach them all things. And that's where it comes into play, that this means something to us too. because we need now to be the ones that are going out and making disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then we continue to teach them all things. So you see, the idea, in a very simple way, of evangelism is something that is important and pertains to every one of us who are disciples of Jesus. That we have a place, that we have a role to play in that work. I want to focus a little bit here just on the work of Africa, because I think we see some of these things play out, and I think it would be helpful. And two, I know a number of you have been involved in sending help and support to brethren in Africa, support to preachers. And there's been those who have been very active in sending relief in the way of money for food. And so I think the work in Africa means something to you. And so there is what I want to share, some things with that. Okay. Eddie, can you make it go? There's a white dot on top. Is that important? Oh, you don't know? So I better not touch it. It might like blow up or something. I don't know. Well, here we go. Now, why didn't it do it when I pushed?
Good question.
Okay.
Now it looks like it's working.
Now it is. Okay. All right. I was pushing the wrong button, but let's not say anything, okay? I thought that I wanted to say thank you to you for the interest that you've had in the brethren in Africa. And like I said, some of you have been busy about sending money and support to them. Something that's always so interesting to me happens every trip. I'll have people say to me, the brethren say to me, things like, say hello to everybody back in the States. Like, yeah, I'll just send out an email to everybody, say hello, because they think you know everybody in the States. Or be sure to thank the brethren who have been helping us with support, or who have been sending money for food. And I always say, well, I'll do the best I can on that, but of course, I don't know who all is sending money. I know some of you have been involved in that. And I just want you to know that it is interesting to me how often there are those who are saying, you know, say thank you for me on that. And I appreciate that attitude very much. And so putting some things here in perspective, Africa is a big place. You know, it's a big continent, 54 countries. You know, my work has primarily been in the southern part. Zimbabwe and Zambia is where I've focused, and a couple of other countries there too. But that's where most of my work has been. So often when I show some pictures of Africa, it's pretty bleak. Because in Zimbabwe, this is a third world country. Most people are poor. Most people are trying to figure out where does the next meal come from. And so a lot of the pictures I show sometimes are not all that pretty. And the drought there just continues. There's a lot of places that's just dry and it's just dirty and dusty. But on this, I thought I wanted to make a point. There are some pretty places in Africa. And even in Zimbabwe and Zambia, Victoria Falls is an incredible place on the north side by the Zambezi River. And it's just incredibly interesting to me that you can look at a site like this, one of the incredible wonders of God's creation, and you can leave this little park area and you can drive 2 miles and you are looking at some of the most poor people in the whole world living in mud huts. And the diversity of that is something that my mind just struggles with, you know, to see and to understand. There's some incredibly beautiful things in Africa and sites that we don't see when we're driving down the road. You know, having to make sure, well, we're not going to drive at night because we don't want to run into an elephant. Well, you know how dangerous it can be to hit deer and the damage that can do? That's nothing. You know, if you hit an elephant. Near Victoria Falls 3 or 4 years ago, a bus, a motor coach, hit an elephant, careened off the road, and 3 people were killed. You know, being hit by a bus. And so when you're in a small bucky or truck, you know, we try our very best not to be driving at night, you know, because it's that dangerous. And other types of animals that you see, you don't see animals everywhere. A lot of places in Zimbabwe and Zambia, animals they're just gone. They've hunted them out. There's really not much to see. But you go into some areas where you're going to see baboons. They're going to be crossing the road. And you might see giraffes. And it's just an incredible sight to me to see something like that because you don't see that in Tennessee or South Carolina. And it's one of those wonders of God. Or look out in the water and you can't get in that water because there are hippos. Don't have to tell me twice. I'm staying out of that, or the crocs, or something, such as that. But what gets me back to Africa time and again is the people. The people there, I find, the majority of them just to be lovely and just of just such a pleasant attitude. And the kids. Kids are kids. It doesn't matter where you are. If you look at them, they giggle and they laugh and they do silly things, so you look at them again. And if you pull out a picture or a camera, they're going to pose for you just like your grandchildren do, and they want a little bit of attention, just like kids here. Nothing in that regard is any different. And I love most the idea that there are those who are looking for something in life. My first trip over, we'd spent about 3 days out in a remote village teaching. There was no church there, but a native preacher had been working in that area, and he had some limited abilities, but he had said to us that, I think there are some people ready to repent. What he was meaning by that's kind of a term that they use, that they're willing to repent of their sins and turn to the Lord and be baptized into Christ. And we went out there and we spent 3 days teaching. And on that third day, and I may have some pictures of this a little bit later, there were 16 that were baptized. And there was still a church there in Laseth Village, that was almost 20 years ago, of the original ones that were baptized way back. My point being is that there are those who have a very pure and honest heart that are looking for something. And you think about this for a moment. It was at the end of that 3 days of preaching, this South African preacher we were with, he says, let's do one more sermon. He said to me, why don't you preach this last lesson? And I said, well, what should I preach on? I don't know what to preach on. And he looked at me kind of with a peculiar look, and he said, these people are all sitting underneath the trees on the ground. He says, look at these people. He said, what do they have? I said, well, they don't really have anything. And he says, give them some hope. And he wasn't saying promise them a place to live or promise them food or promise them anything other than the hope that comes through the gospel. Because that's something that's real, that's something that's tangible. Even if we can give them food for today, that can be important. But tomorrow they still have needs. But the greater need is, there's a time when this life is no more and we stand before the Lord. That's a greater need, to be ready for that day. And to have the hope that whatever happens in this life, the hope is that maybe in this life, I will have to look for food every day. Maybe in this life, I will forever have to live in a mud hut with a thatch roof that leaks when it finally rains. Maybe in this life, I won't have to worry about, well, what am I going to wear tomorrow, because it'll be what you are wearing today. None of that may change. But if you have hope of eternity with God, then we have everything. That's the hope we need to have. And that's what we need to teach. In this country, we need to teach the same thing. The problem in this country is we have everything. We have been blessed so much, and I'm still not sure how to work this through my mind. Have we been blessed or have we been cursed? We have so much, and we give thanks for our blessings. And I think we should do that. But at the same time, Satan has used it in such a way that we have become so self-serving that we don't understand and think about our true needs. Our true needs go beyond this life. Our true need is a relationship with God. That's our true need. And I wish we would just be happy to know and to understand that if we are in Christ, we have everything. We have everything if we are in Jesus Christ. And that we would be so excited about that we want to tell someone else. In fact, We can't help but to tell someone else. When we think about like Luke chapter 24 and those hours and days after the resurrection of Jesus, when they became fully convinced that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God, some of them knew and understood that before, but when he died on the cross, I think they were bewildered with what just happened. We thought he was the one. But when the empty tomb was found, oh, there was a resurgence of excitement there. There was a resurgence there. They couldn't help but tell everyone. They had a message to tell. And you read through the rest of Luke chapter 24, you get into Acts chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. They couldn't help but tell the message of Jesus, the excitement of that. I want us to be that way. To understand the message that we have and how important it is, how incredible it is, the blessings, the hope that we have. That's what I want us to be able to tell others. We will tell them all about it because it is that incredible. I want you to meet some people in Africa. I love the servant attitude. Those who are just anxious to help us in some way. You know, on the left, Fraser Chilanga, who had just become a Christian. We're doing a preacher's class, a study for 3 days. And he just wanted to do, so he kept, and what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? Well, he couldn't help teach. He's just become a Christian, but he wants to do something. And so we had these name tags. I said, if you can help every man coming in just to put their first name in English, in real big letters, that would be incredible. That would be very helpful. And so he helped do that. It was kind of funny. He had some guys do that, and then they stood there trying to figure out, what do you do with this? They didn't know what to do. You know, it's one of those peel-off things that you stick on. Never seen that before. And they saw mine was sticking up here, you know, but they didn't understand they had to peel that thing off. You know, like, Fraser, just peel that off, you know, and put that on. And no, you can't look at it this way and see your name right. That's upside down. You got to turn it the other way. You got to explain everything like that. You know, they're looking down and seeing their name. Well, it's upside down to us, you know. But Fraser, he just wanted to help, whatever he could do to help. And then there were these ladies, these sisters, who fixed food for us because we're there for 3 days, you know, and the preachers are like just sleeping right there. And they come and they're fixing food and they're serving. And then you have the young man, there were some chairs that we're sitting in, and the young man, because it's the young men that would do this, they would jump up quickly and they would get the food and they'd bring it and they would kind of, you know, bow in front of us, all of us, to anybody that's old. I hit that category now. And so, you know, it's just like if there was a young man sitting here and I walked into the room, he would quickly get up and he would say, old man, sit here. And that means a little bit, don't laugh too much, Patty. And that means a little something different there than here. We're kind of derogatory about that, you know, that old man over there. No. Old man is respectable. That's respect. That's honor. Old man. You know, come sit here. For the first time, several years ago, I had gone somewhere to preach. I was preaching in 4 different places around Bullaway. I'm just being driven and driving, running in. The service already started, and I sneak in the back door of this little shanty where the church was meeting, and I'm taking off my backpack, and this young man, he comes and he says, old man, sit here. And so I turned around to see who he was talking to, and there's nobody there. And he says, old man, sit here. Well, if I can make it over there, I will. I'll sit down, you know, old man. Anyway, just the servant attitude I just love so much. So here's something we do a lot in the work in Africa is we do some preacher training classes. You know, we preached out in the bush a lot, and there's a place for that. And in fact, God willing, here in a couple months, we got some work in the bush we're going to do. That's important. Going around to villages and going to some churches and going to some churches, you know, meeting underneath the tree. We're preaching underneath a tree. Most of them don't have a church building, you know. They wouldn't hardly know what to do with this. And that's wonderful and that's great. And so maybe we can go to a half a dozen or maybe 10 villages and churches and preach. That's encouraging. That's helpful to them. But we have a preacher training class here. This was in Livingston, Zambia, and if I recall, we had about 25 preachers there who live in 25 different villages and who preach at one or two different churches. They rotate around. Maybe 75 churches are touched by men that we teach and train. We can't get to 75 villages. And if we do, we're just there for a day and we're gone. If we can help these men to gain more understanding, knowledge, and ability, they're there all the time. And they can go and they can preach. So our focus in the last 10 years has been doing these preacher training classes like this. In this case here, Tad Corder is my partner, and he's teaching, and Christopher Lachaha was translating for him, and then Amos Samoli here is translating for me in the picture on the right. Amos is a really good translator, and I'm always thankful when he can translate for me because he's very proficient. And he's rather interesting, as some of these other preachers are, but he's just really good about this. You see how he is standing, and he kind of has half an eye on me, what I'm doing. And wherever my hands are and whatever I'm doing, when he starts to speak, he's going to mimic and do exactly the same thing that I do. You know, if I got my Bible and I read and I slap my Bible, at that same point, he's going to do the same thing. You know, he kind of does everything just the same way. But excellent a translator and worker in the kingdom. And these were some of the men we had in our class. You know, the Proverbs says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And that can happen in different ways. That we kind of look at that as our purpose in doing these preacher training classes there. But it's the same thing that happens here. You know, when you think about here, I mean, look, Wednesday nights are hard. I'll be honest about it. Wednesday nights are hard. People have been at work. Kids have been at school. People are tired. And yet to make the commitment on Wednesday night, you know, to be here and spend some time with brethren, we're going to open the Bible, we're going to study and work together, and we're going to encourage each other. Iron sharpens iron. And it's a good thing. It doesn't matter where that's at. You know, that's a good thing. And that's one reason why we are here tonight even. So last year, that is a picture from last year. Spent some time in Zambia going out to a place called Mulindi. And it's been one of the many times where I've been in places in Africa that I never would have thought or ever dreamed of being. I was trying to explain to my grandkids this not too long ago, the older ones, that I remember when I was in 3rd and 4th grade and we're studying about places far away and we're watching some movies for geography or something, I don't know. Movies like some of you will know, like we got those 2 reels up there turning, you know, kind of a thing. That's the way movies were years ago. And there were some great explorers in Africa going into the deep, dark part of Africa, and they're in Land Rovers, and they're going through rivers and creeks, and they're cutting their way through and stuff like that. You know, for boys, that's incredible. I want to do that. You know, boys, that's what you want to do. I never in my wildest dreams ever thought that I would be in Africa in a Land Rover on dirty, dusty roads and going through creeks and sleeping in the bush. You know, and yet that's what I've had opportunity to do for the purpose of going places and preaching and teaching the gospel. Never would have dreamed that. Going to Mulindi was one of those days one of those trips where we were 3 hours in the bush. And now I have to be very frank and honest. It's like I'm getting to where I avoid some of those trips like that now, because it's really hard. And Tad Corder, my young partner with me, this was like, 2 hours into this trip, and we've bounced and bounced around in the back of this bucky to the point he's going, I thought this was an hour drive. And I said, that's what I thought too, but they're saying another hour, and Tad is going, he's dying. And I thought, well, I got a good excuse to be dying over here on this side, because I'm a lot older than he is, Picking up some people along the way as we head on to this village of Mulindi. This building right here is where the church meets. It's a little building that they have put, and that's where put together and complete with pews on the inside. I hope you take a good look at those pews, and the next time on Sunday you think the sermon goes a little too long and you're tired of sitting, think about these pews right here, and then be thankful when you get up that you don't have to worry about a splinter. And because these pews right here, these benches are like not nice. And yet these brethren would be incredibly happy that they have this place to meet in. On this day in the village, we're actually not preaching there in that little building. This is the Lord's Day, and there are 3 or 4 churches several miles around that have come together here at the school. They'd made arrangements to use a room here at the school, and I know we had about 140, at best I could count, that were there that day from young to old. And we spent a good part of the day teaching classes and preaching here to these brethren. It amazes me that you can just keep preaching, and they sit and they listen. If you're somewhere and you preach into the evening and it's dark now, and you're preaching by a lantern, and you are so tired that you can't even see the words in your Bible anymore, and you say, it's 10 o'clock, we must stop now. And there'll be someone who says, can you do one more? And you come to a point where it's like, I really cannot. I can't go any further, But they would listen to another lesson. Wow. What do you do with that? It's just, how do you not fall in love with that? How do you not fall in love with those people and that interest and that desire to hear God's word? How does that not move you? It's just incredible. And I've had that happen time and again. The next day, Tad and I spent the day with 16 men back in that little church building. And this was just some special classes for some of the men, and just Tad and I. And I just loved this picture right here because it showed Tad and I together. Tad's a younger guy. When he started traveling with us, he was 34. He's not as young now. I think he's 46, and I'm not as young either. And but to look at these men is really my focus here on this. Their intensity. I don't know what I was even saying right here. But just look at the intensity of these men. They're listening to every word. And then when I have something to say, then we're going to have some discussion, maybe some response, and they're going to ask questions. There will always be questions. There will always be good questions that are asked. I want to mention here about Henry Sinalabito, 75-year-old Henry. He's sitting in the back. He's been in this area, this region. He established these churches out here in this area. And I had no idea what we were talking about here, and we'd answered it. And Henry, in this very, very kind way, stands up and he says, "Brother, could I say something? Brother Henry, please speak. Tell us what are you thinking?" And I forget what it was, what he said, but this goes back in part to this respect thing, because he's an old man, but a respect thing because he has probably converted a good number of these men who are there. He has preached in all of those churches out in that region. He doesn't live close here. He lives a 6-hour bike ride away from here. He rides his bike, to this place so he can preach. He'll come and stay, stay in somebody's hut with them for 3 or 4 days, and he'll preach around the area. But this is just interesting to me how when there were several questions, we'd gone back and forth on some things, but when Henry got up and he spoke and he said some things there, and he was done and he sat down. And that was it. The old man had spoken. They respected what he said, and that answered it. I've seen that happen 2 or 3 times, And in a situation or two, I was really glad when the old man stood up and said, "Could I say something, please?" And would have something to say that just settled the issue and we could move on. Just interesting to think about. And it's respect, not just because he's old. Can I make this point? If we keep living, we're going to get old. That doesn't mean wise. There are some people, if we talk about brethren, there are some, as they get older, become wiser. They're students of God's Word, and they learn some things. There's experience involved. They've dealt with situations. And as they get older, we go to them and we can ask questions, and we can get help. We can get knowledge from them. We appreciate their wisdom. Some people just get old. You see the difference? If we want to grow older and have more to offer to the church, to the brethren, to those who are outside, we better work on that. It doesn't just happen. The old man spoke. We were leaving all this area the next day or two, whenever that was. We drove through a portion of road there that just kind of captured my attention. There are those times where you're somewhere and you look around and it's like you have no question or doubt in your mind. I'm in Africa right now. It just looks like Africa. And sometimes, though it's very stark and it's very rough, it's still beautiful in a different kind of way. And I just thought these pictures here maybe it reminds me of that. Time on the road can be useful, like in this case. We had Fraser Chilangisha with us. And at this time, Fraser has been a Christian now for about 2 years. And he is a student of the Bible. He had grown so much in this period of time he's been a Christian. And as we're driving along, we had Henry sitting in the front seat. I didn't get to ride in the front seat as the old man because Henry had more seniority than I do. So the old man got to sit on the front seat where there was actually padding. I wanted that seat, but Henry got to sit there this time. We have Henry in front, and Chris Lachaha is driving us. Tad and I are in the back, and Fraser. And the conversations that we had in those hours of driving was just very encouraging and uplifting to me. A little bit of small talk here and there about whatever, this and that. But most of the discussion along the way was just all spiritual things, biblical things. It was a wonderful period of time of teaching as we went along. So Fraser is the second one from the left. And we had stopped along the way for a break, and he said, "Can we get a picture?" Yeah, sure. Good time. Let's get a picture. Tad and I and Fraser and Henry. And it meant a lot to Fraser that he was traveling with us. He wasn't doing any of the teaching, but he wanted to go. He wanted to hear everything that was being said. He wanted to hear the classes. He wanted to hear the discussion. And in the discussion back there at that little church building, he didn't say a thing the whole day. But he was listening to everything. I mean, that's how you grow. That's how you learn. And I'm not sure this was a literal thing, but you think about Paul when he was writing to the churches of Galatia, and he makes mention of this. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship. There was a relationship there. And now they're realizing, looking at Paul and Barnabas and speaking about the church in Jerusalem. And it's like they understood and respected Paul now. You remember they didn't the first time he went back. 3 years after he'd been converted and he had gone away, and now he'd come back to Jerusalem. He wanted to join fellowship with the church in Jerusalem. You remember what they said, don't you? Like, no way. We know who you are. Remember in Acts chapter 9, verse 26, 27, somewhere in there, until until Barnabas helped convince them that he truly was a disciple of Jesus. And so that right hand of fellowship was kind of interesting to me. And you look at Henry here and how he's holding my hand. And that's not uncommon, in African nations for men to hold hands. It's not like we see it here. It's trust. And tribal people are very much this way. It's about demonstrating trust. And it was interesting to me, it was encouraging to me that it was like, Henry knows who I am now. He trusts me. He respects what I'm doing. And that doesn't happen the first day. I've worked with Henry probably 3 times prior to this. But on this trip, we'd come to that point, where he trusted me now. And we could work together. I could teach, and he could say, listen to what Brother Joe is saying. And it took several times for that to come, to that point. And I thought that was interesting. It meant a lot to me. But let me tell you something more about Henry. Henry is a chief in the Tonga tribe. And he's a village chief, and he's a chief out in this area. Everybody knows Henry. And we are 2 hours from where he lives, and we're driving along, and he's waving at people, and they're waving back, not just in the friendly way, they're pointing at him. They know who he is. He's a chief in that area. But beyond that, it's more than that. He's been to their house before. He's been to their farm. He's been to their community meeting, not as a chief, but as a preacher. Everybody knows him as a gospel preacher. Oh, they've not all listened to him. They've not all responded to what he's preaching. But they know him and they respect him for that. He didn't tell me this, but Lachaha told me about this another time. He says, I must tell you something about Henry. Explains about him being a chief. I say, yes, I know. And he says, no, there's more. His brother was chief of the Tonga tribe in Zambia and Zimbabwe. And his brother passed away. Family was called home, and his brother was buried. And Henry was slated to be the next chief of the Tonga tribe. I don't know what that means exactly. I mean, I know there's respect, there's responsibility, there's probably some money involved there, and some things such as that. But after considering it, he determined he couldn't do that. One thing he said, well, how could I do that and leave the brethren who need me? I have to go back and preach. That was one thing. The other thing was, he said, I asked him about that, and he confided this. He says, to be the chief of the tribe, you are the one who has to lead the tribe in the worship of the gods of the tribe. He said, I can't do that. I have one God. And so there was no way that I could become chief of my tribe. Because now I have to support, I have to bow before the gods. I can't do that. Wow. Talk about integrity. Talk about faith. When we think about royal bloodline, and that's kind of what he was royalty among the Tonga people. And as we said, there's some benefits that come with that. We understand royalty. We watch it on TV, or we keep up with, English royalty and some things like that. What little girl doesn't want to be a princess? We have 5 granddaughters, and we've seen a lot of princess movies. What girl doesn't want to be a princess, okay? We still have some little granddaughters that, which princess are you today? I see they're wearing a princess dress. Sandra knows which dress that is. I have no idea. Which princess are you, Belle? Oh, of course not. That's Cinderella. Right, I know, that's Cinderella. I got that. What little girl doesn't want to be a princess? What boy at some point doesn't want to be a prince and have all the wonderful things that go with being a prince, okay? Do you know that we are of royal bloodline? That's Christian, us. I'm not me, us. that we are of royal bloodline, do we give consideration to this? You know, that is far greater than being the king or queen of England or being the chief of the Tonga tribe. It's much, much, much greater than that. In 1 Peter, in 1 Peter, the first couple of chapters, I think really nails this and helps us to see and understand. Royalty, the royal family of God. With that is the promise that is given to us. Those who are counted as the elect, chapter 1, verse 2, by obedience and the sprinkling of the blood of Christ. As disciples of Jesus Christ, that's the bloodline that we have. I've heard some brethren saying, I think so very well, you know, we're talking about kin. And we have our own kin, you know, our own families that we are close to. We're related by blood. Someone pointed out to me one time, and it had slipped past me. Well, as disciples of Jesus, guess what? We're kin too, and we are of the same blood. Not the blood that goes through our veins, but the blood of the Lord. That's the bloodline that we are a part of. And in chapter 2 of 1 Peter, he goes on to say, living stones, a spiritual house, a holy priesthood. We offer spiritual sacrifices to God, a royal priesthood. In verse 9, he goes on to say, royalty by blood. We share that in common. Not just those who are here in this room, but those who have come to Christ and have been baptized into Him anywhere in this country or around the room, if we can think about what that royalty is and what that means, and that we are a part of that. I just thought this was a cool picture to share with you. You know, we were finally heading back to town, and we stopped for a little break, and it was just a beautiful sunset. And we got back in, and then I realized we had 2 more hours to go, and I was sad again. You know, because it was just a long way to go into the dark. Real quickly, let me show you a couple more things. Crossing over into Zimbabwe, going through the border. The border crossings in third world countries are interesting and sometimes troubling and sometimes very time-consuming, just getting through. But again, it just reminds me of some of the blessings and benefits we have here in this country that we just take for granted. We're going to go out into the bush in Zimbabwe and do some teaching there. Again, a beautiful day, and there's some sights. This is very rough and barren, but still beautiful to me in some ways, and interesting sights. These ladies walking along the road carrying their water pots. And then there's this lady on the right over here, an overachiever, I'm going to say. She got about 12 pots on top of her head, you know, and I'm sure they're all empty, but still, I thought that was interesting. The roads. I put this in there because some of you previously have helped Solomon Chakomba to buy a bucky several years ago, a little truck. And man, how these roads just beat a vehicle up. This vehicle in front is Short Mapande's truck, and he needs to replace it so bad, just does not have the funds. I've been trying to collect some funds to help him buy a truck. Some brethren bought this truck for him about 7 or 8 years ago, and it is just slap wore out. I mean, literally just held together by wire and straps. And these roads are just incredible. Sometimes, like the picture on the right, it's smoother to get off of the road and to drive along on the side of the road than it is to drive on the roads. They're just so broken up. And I'll share this with you just real quick. A preacher training out in the bush here at this little church building. They had, for some time, they had made bricks and they had built walls to this church building. They'd made a floor in it. And didn't have money to put a roof on it. And so we're talking about doing a preacher training, and the Peter Medinda said, instead of spending money in town to rent a place for us to do this, could money be used instead to help finish this building? Long story short, there was an individual that had given me some money for just to use for whatever. This was not money out of the treasury, just individual money that we used to put a roof on this building before we got there, so we could do the preacher training out here where a lot of these preachers lived. And they just stayed in the building. They just slept in the building at night. And there were some sisters for 3 days that came, and they fixed food for us, you know, to have. And We had 3 days of classes out there in Matibi. Had 38 men there. And that's a bunch of guys to have in a class. Here are some men who were coming on the first day. The guy on the right, most interesting to me, had walked 6 hours to come and to be a part of the classes. Some walked a mile or two. Some rode a bus to bring them closer. But Matthias had walked 6 hours to come. And this is just our class inside. You know, all the men who were there. And we're talking about some simple things, really, like the pattern that God gives us to follow. The Bible gives us a pattern of how He wants us to live, and what is the Lord's church? What is salvation? How does it come about? We're looking at all those simple things. A group of preachers. What makes a preacher? What is the role and responsibility of preachers? And some things like that. And then an hour of question and answers. And I say an hour because after an hour, when we were just slap wore out, we have to say, it's been 1 hour and we're going to stop now. You know, or we would just be there until dark, I suppose. We would just keep on going. Let's see. Oh, these children on the left, I snuck up here to these kids who were eating and to get their picture. And this little girl, she was a happy little girl until she looked at me. And then she became very unhappy and started to cry and got up and she ran away. And it kind of broke my heart, but that's what happens. Someone was asking me before we started about what is that you eat there? And what some of you have sent money to buy food is for that, they call it sadza. And the plate there, the mashed potatoes there is not mashed potatoes. Oh, how I wish it was. It's a corn meal that they, basically what they do is they put it in boiling water and they stir and boil it down to it's a very thick, like a paste. And they plop that on your plate and you eat it as Christopher is there. You take it and you make a little ball and you just eat it with your fingers. You eat like that. And there was some boiled cabbage there, and you take your sadza and you kind of wrap that up in that cabbage. And I had some roasted goat, and you just break that up and you eat it with your sadza. Okay, and they love that. It's a wonderful food to them. It's not so delightful to me, but that's their staple. And when some of you've sent money to buy food for the brethren, that's what they're buying. They're buying bags of that meal. And so they want to have 2 meals a day just of sadza. And it's very filling, it's very heavy, at least for me, it rides there like a brick. But you know you have eaten, when you eat that sadza. So that's what you're helping them to buy when you've sent money to them. So I want to get to the end of this right here. We stayed at this little lodge out in the bush. The picture, it's much nicer than reality, but it was a bed. We had a bed to sleep on for a couple of nights, which was really, really nice. And since we were taking care of ourselves in the morning, we could boil some water and have hot tea, some instant oatmeal, and peanut butter on bread. And compared to sadza, we were in high cotton right there. We thought we were doing wonderful there. But again, some of the beauties of Africa at night, and I'm sure you can't see it. Well, a little bit you can. I was trying to get a picture with my cell phone of the Milky Way, and this does injustice. The nighttime sky in the bush is like incredible, and the Milky Way looks like you can reach out and touch it, and it's just incredible. In the early morning, I usually wake up kind of early, and I'll get a cup of hot tea if I can, and sit there on that little porch and I'm awake before the fish eagles start to cry and the hippos start to croak. But you hear them when they wake up, and it's just kind of one of those surreal kind of experiences, really. This is just some teaching in various places in the bush, in Lukosi, and some things as that. There's so much more I'd like to say, but man, I've already gone through an hour here, and we need to close this up. And can I share something real quick right here? Fraser Chilangisha, I mentioned him earlier. And he has grown and developed so much in the last couple of years. And he is going out now with Chris and some others doing the teaching. He's teaching now. And some people have said, he's only been a Christian for 2 years. And it's like, how can he be doing that? You know, and even among some who have said, well, I'm not very comfortable teaching. And I've tried to be careful how I respond, but at the same time, I want to be very frank about it too. Christopher gets up at 4 o'clock every morning, and he lights a lantern, and he sits and he reads this Bible for 4 or 5 hours before the day gets started. You know, if we get up every day and we read our Bible for 4 or 5 hours, we might impress ourselves with what we learn. We might be really surprised at how much we have to tell other people about the Lord and about the gospel. There are a lot of people who have been Christians for a long time who say, well, I can't teach. And I don't know enough to teach, but they've been a Christian a long time. If Fraser had been a Christian for 2 years, and he could stand up here right now, and he could teach a class or do a sermon that we would all benefit from. Thinking back to where we started, you know, the compassion that Jesus had for those who are lost. I want us to have that kind of compassion. And at the same time, I want us to be able to have something to do with that compassion. I want us to be prepared to be able to go out and do something with that. That is, I want us to be able to go out and to teach others. I want us to be able to do that. But we have to want it. Knowledge does not come by osmosis. If it did, I would know it, because I have more than one time woke up with my head on my Bible, but nothing seeped in. But when we read and study it, we learn. And we can know and understand God's will for us. At that place at Matibi that we just left a moment ago, we're getting down to our last couple of days, and Steve Klein, one of my travel partners, we've traveled together the most. We both have gray hair, or white hair. And he leaned over and he said, we were both really tired. And he said, how much longer do you think we can be doing this? I said, Steve, this is a bad day to ask me. Don't ask me that today. This is a bad day. I was so tired, I was ready to go home. And we do get concerned about that. I mean, that's just a reality. And I think also fuels our interest in going back. We're planning to go back together here in a couple of months. And there's a part of me that does not look forward to it because it really makes me tired. And there's a part of me that can't wait to go because of the work that can be done and the response that we receive. But there'll come a day when we can't go. And so hopefully some of the preachers that we're teaching and training, and we keep telling them, and now I'm starting to get more direct about it to some of the younger men. And I've said to some, it's like, I'd say like to a young man, Tony, it's like, Tony, Steve and I, we're getting old, and before long we will be no more. Are you ready to carry on? What about you, Mike? When Steve and I are no more, can you stand up and teach? Can you get up and can you teach the brethren? Can you teach those who are lost? Buck, are you ready to carry on when we are no more? Look, it's real to all of us that we have to be ready to tell and teach the gospel. Because we have that which gives hope, real hope. We have that which gives us direction for life and prepares us for the day that we stand before the Lord. We'll all be there. We won't miss that appointment. And there's nothing more frightening to me than to envision that day. And I'm not exactly sure what that will be like. But we'll be standing before the Lord. And I just can't imagine how so many will feel. And I don't want to be like this, standing before the Lord. And He looks at me. And then He looks to His Father and He says, I don't know this one. How scary is that? But it doesn't have to be that way. We can be ready for the day. And it's a day that we don't have to fear, but with confidence we can be ready for the day. The Apostle Paul says in Galatians chapter 3, verse 26 beginning, he says, he's speaking to those who are disciples just like you and me. For you are all sons of God by faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. Are you ready? Are you ready for the day? Or it could be for someone, are you ready to put on Christ? To become a child of God, are you ready for that day? We have to be ready. We have to make ready now because we don't know when this life comes to an end. Can we help you in some way to make your life right before the Lord? Even a Christian who is needing some help, some encouragement, need to confess sins, can we help you? Or if you need to become a child of God, can we help you with that tonight? Would you come as we stand and sing?
All right, softly and tender. Softly and
Tenderly Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. Seal the portals, he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home, ye who are
I don't see any. We'll meet back here at 9:30 on Sunday morning. Brother Mike Moneymaker has a closing prayer. We'll have a